Hello and welcome to Bounding Into Comics. My name is John Trent. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief at Bounding Into Comics. Today we're going to be talking about Loki Season 1, Episode 5, Journey into Mystery. Before we get to that review, I'd like to ask if you could please hit that subscribe button if you are not already subscribed. If you are already subscribed, please make sure you are still subscribed. YouTube does like to unsubscribe people for whatever reason. And then hopefully by the end of this video, I'll have earned your like, and you will give us a like, and that you will share this video with your friends and family, and that you will hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future Loki reviews. With that out of the way, let's get into this review. Loki is alive, but he finds himself trapped in the void with a number of Loki variants that are hunted by a hungry tempest named Alioth. Meanwhile, Sylvie is back at the Time Variance Authority, the TVA, attempting to extract information from Ravonna Renslayer about who created the TVA. This episode is a vast improvement from the previous two installments, which were not only boring, but began adding stupidity on top of the snooze fest. That's not to say this episode doesn't have its own moments of boredom, but they are kept at bay by some exciting action set pieces. The episode starts where the Nexus event left off, with Loki encountering 4 different variants of himself. There isn't much time for small talk. Thankfully, we've seen way too much of that in this series. Richard E. Grant's classic Loki moves things quickly along as he tells Tom Hiddleston's Loki where they are, the Void, and that they are about to get eaten by Alioth, a giant shadowy storm beast that is quite hungry. It's a nice little scene that makes you want to know more about the Void as well as Alioth, not to mention these other Lokis. And while we don't get answers right away, this episode does indeed answer them. And as much as I've criticized the CGI and graphics over the previous 4 episodes, Alioth was well designed and looked very similar to his comic book appearances in the Avengers. This is the Marvel Studios graphics we know and expect, something that has been lacking over the course of the previous episodes. So it's good to finally see it arrive. From there, we switch back to Sylvie as she interrogates Renslayer in order to figure out who created the TVA. This scene falls flat because Sylvie stays within the confines of the TVA instead of transporting to a Nexus event and using her enchantment powers to interrogate her. I mean, Renslayer asking Sylvie to trust her is a complete joke when she can just take a TemPad device and use her enchantment powers to extract the information. Not only that, but Sylvie made it clear she doesn't trust anyone. From a narrative standpoint, this was absolutely stupid and makes Sylvie look dumb. She even gives her the TemPad, gives Renslayer the TemPad, meaning she does in fact trust her. Remember, Sylvie's primary mission is to destroy the TVA and the person behind it, but now all of a sudden she's giving the TemPad and trusting the top dog at the TVA, or at least one of the top dogs. However, we do get some information about the Void, as Renslayer reveals that prune timelines are sent there, so it won't continue growing. The timelines won't continue growing. Not only that, but the Void is at the end of time. We find that out as well. The series then switches back to Loki, and we get more exposition on the Void as the 4 variants explain what Alioth is, although I'm not sure we really needed any more explanation than what Grant's older Loki gave us in the beginning. This brief conversation seemed rather meaningless, although Loki's reaction to discovering the alligator was a Loki was slightly amusing. There's a bunch of Marvel Easter eggs in the next scene as we're introduced to Kid Loki's base on the Void. You get the Thanos helicopter, Throng, and there's even a Mjolnir. The episode then shifts back to Sylvie at the TVA. Sylvie is about to deduce that when the TVA prunes people, they are sent to the end of time, where the Void is. She also suspects that whoever is behind the TVA is hiding at the end of time in order to avoid detection. However, while this theory might have been plausible before the last episode, the Nexus event when Loki and Sylvie were about to kiss seems to throw a kink in that theory, as you had a Nexus event within a Nexus event. But that's not addressed at all, and I doubt it will be. We'll see. Nevertheless, Sylvie's stupidity for trusting Renslayer is put on full display, as Miss Minutes and Renslayer just buy time in order for some Minutemen to show up. There's a bunch of needless banter back and forth between Sylvie and Renslayer, as Sylvie just ends up pruning herself so she can be transported to the Void. It was utterly meaningless, and really just that whole scene shouldn't have even existed, because it's just there to honestly show how Sylvie is an idiot, which she shouldn't be. She had this years-long plot to go after the TVA, and now they're just showing her as an idiot instead of this cunning mastermind who had been outwitting this agency for years. Switching back to Loki, we get some fun humor as the Lokis are telling their stories. The black boastful Loki insults the alligator Loki and pays the price as the alligator attacks. That was quite funny. I laughed at that. Along with the humor, we get a masterclass in storytelling from Grant's classic Loki as he details how he survived Thanos using his illusion magic. Hiddleston then gives an inspiring speech about wanting to kill Alioth in order to be able to get off the void. The speech was more what you would expect something from Thor, but I thought Hiddleston did deliver it well, and it was rousing, but you would expect someone like Thor to deliver that, not Loki. Even while he gives the speech, though, he's laughed out of the room as the odds are overwhelming. As he exits, he meets more Loki variants, including the Vote Loki or President Loki version that had been teased for a while. Back to Sylvie, and she's arrived in the void and has to quickly escape from Alioth. As Alioth hunts her, she uses her enchantment magic on him and is able to brush him aside, but not for long. While using her enchantment powers, she sees a castle that Alioth is hiding. The storm is hiding the castle behind him. As Alioth pursues her, she eventually gets help from Mobius, who arrives in what appears to be an homage to Toy Story's Pizza Planet truck. It's a nice little action scene when you once again see the threat of Alioth firsthand. The suspenseful music also helps set the scene very well. So kudos to that. I actually did enjoy that scene quite a bit. You get the threat level, you get a nice little aid from Mobius, and you get that little hint of her using her enchantment powers. I thought that was actually really well done. As the show transitions back to Loki, it treads to alarming levels of stupidity, seemingly only to highlight the fact that Loki, no matter the variant, is always working a double-cross angle to gain an advantage for himself. Hiddleston's eye-rolling reaction to the entire exchange is exactly what I felt watching. The only bright spot in this scene is the alligator attacking the President Loki variant and biting off his hand. Everything else was just eye-rolling stupidity. Loki eventually escapes with Grant's Loki, the Alligator, and Kid Loki. Grant's Loki uses some nice illusion magic. We get to see those nice CGI graphics again. And then creates a portal that takes them elsewhere on the planet. It's odd that he's able to create a portal on the planet, but is apparently trapped on the planet. No explanation for how the portal works is given, and this portal will also come into play later in the episode as well, and it's an issue that I have with the episode. The introduction of this portal and the use of it and the non-use of it, as we'll find out later. After escaping, the other three variants are on board for finding a way to kill Alioth, believing the only way they can change themselves is by defeating the TVA. It's a weird turn, as just by stating that they've clearly indicated they've already changed and made better versions of themselves, despite being captured and pruned by the TVA. It was a weird take. I don't think they really thought about that very much, but I don't think they think a lot about their dialogue very much in this show, because most of it has been absolutely atrocious. We switch back to Sylvie, and there's actually an interesting discussion about the ends justifying the means between her and Mobius. However, it doesn't really go deeper than a surface level examination, and the conversation is quickly turned to Sylvie telling Mobius her plan is to confront Alioth. It was huge missed opportunity. I actually thought that would have been an interesting discussion to talk about that between those two characters, and it's just kind of brushed aside and they move on. There is a really neat action sequence where we see Alioth really show off its fearsome power as he devours a World War II era cannon-class destroyer escort named the USS Eldridge. This was a really awesome sequence with great special effects that, again, showed off how much of a threat Alioth is. He just absolutely wipes out this cannon-class destroyer in seconds. Truly, truly, really cool stuff happened in that scene. That was probably the second best scene in this entire episode. It was really well done. Next, Sylvie eventually shows up and derides Loki's plan to kill Alioth as idiotic. Instead, she offers her own plan to enchant it. It's actually a decent scene as both of them mock each other's plan, but Sylvie's plan eventually wins, as at least it's somewhat proven based on her first encounter. So I did like the little bit of bickering and banter between the two there. I thought that was actually somewhat well done. Back at the TVA, Renslayer is interrogating B-15. He's got her locked up in this prison. It's a rather pointless conversation that only describes Sylvie's motivations like we didn't know them already. It should have been cut. It was useless. Get it out of there. Don't need it. It added nothing to the show whatsoever. Did not need it at all. The show almost grinds to a halt in the next scene as Mobius discusses whether or not the alligator is actually a Loki with the other Loki variants. We do get an answer from Mobius on why he's completely turning on the TVA. during this conversation. He simply says it's never too late to change. It's so strange given he only believes that he is a variant that had been plucked out of a different timeline based on Loki's assertions from Sylvie. For an investigator, he seems to have thrown out all of his deduction and reasoning skills out the window. He's just gotten rid of them, chucked them out, and he's not using them anymore. And so they're kind of denigrating that character with that statement, and it's just so he can like help them out, I guess. It's and you gotta have that feel good moment. It didn't work for me. And then immediately following that, you get this scene of Loki and Sylvie sitting on a hill and discussing their love moment from the previous episode, and this felt like it was a never-ending scene. It like felt like it was went on forever. And if you have a pillow while watching this scene, you might just fall asleep. It wasn't just boring; it was excruciatingly boring. This scene was absolutely terrible. Terrible scene. Didn't need it. Cut it out. Get rid of it. Throw it in the waste bin. Completely pointless. It finally ends, and then we do get them facing off against Alioth. However, right before the showdown, the entire team breaks up before the fight begins. It's like a reverse Avengers Assembles moment. It didn't make any sense. So Sylvie gives Mobius a temp pad so he can leave. The other Loki variants then go their own way, but do decide to stay in the void for whatever reason. They say that it's their home now, which, like, okay, running from a giant creature, I guess, has made it your home. You don't want to, like, get out of there. It's really just really strange. Seemed very out of character for even these Loki variants that we don't really know much about them, but it does. I mean, we got this whole great story from Richard E. Grant's Loki character explaining why he was captured by the TVA, is that he wanted to go back into the world, and now he's like basically choosing to stay in isolation again instead of taking that step to go back into the world and find out what happened to his brother and what was going on with the rest of his Asgardian family. So that just didn't make any sense to me. And it wasn't very good. But not only is this weird that they are breaking up as they're about to fight Alliance, but as Mobius is about to leave, Loki embraces him in a hug and calls him a friend. This is the man who was just brutally torturing him with Sif an episode ago in a time loop prison. Albeit he did free Loki and plan to topple the TVA, but it's hard to imagine forgiving someone that quickly, especially when you're a Loki and you have a long memory. It's out of character, but not a surprise given how Loki's been showcased throughout this show. He's pretty much been out of character ever since they used the footage from Endgame in the first episode. The fight finally begins with Loki and Sylvie planning to ambush Alioth as it devours a variant branch that is supposed to arrive on the Void. However, the branch timeline doesn't show up, and Loki has to play decoy while Sylvie attempts to enchant the creature. Things look like they are getting out of hand as Loki's distraction doesn't work for long. Fortunately, Grant's Loki uses his illusion magic to recreate Asgard. This is a truly Marvel moment as we see just how powerful his illusion magic is. This is probably the best scene in the entire show right here. And it was really cool to see Richard E. Grant's classic Loki really show off that power. He really stole the show, the character and the way it was written and the performance. You want to know more about this character, and you'd rather be following his character rather than the two characters they've laid out for us in Sylvie and Tom Hiddleston's Loki. But back to the fight. Sylvie still isn't strong enough to enchant Alioth on her own. She and Loki, who doesn't know the enchantment power, then try and enchant the beast. So Loki doesn't know that enchantment power, but they're like, you can do it because I'm a Loki too. Or because you're a Loki too. And it's like, okay, that's not how it works. Because Sylvie said she had to learn it herself on the go. And Loki just has to figure it out in like a split second. Maybe you should have been teaching him that instead of being on the hillside. You should have been teaching him how to do the enchantment power. And it would have been a much more interesting scene rather than just sitting on the hillside and moping about each other, which is a terrible scene. As Grant's Loki continues to recreate Asgard, Alioth begins to surround him. His power, Grant's power fades, and Loki struggles to master the enchantment power. His power then begins to rapidly fade. Grant's power begins, and Alioth eventually consumes him. Remember that portal created? He doesn't use it to escape. He just continues to act as bait, and Alioth devours him. I'm hoping this is a bait and switch, because remember, this is the guy who was Master of Illusion, and he was able to trick Thanos with his illusion magic. So I'm hoping that this is an illusion too, that he was actually consumed. But it's hard to believe that, because you do see the helmet leave him and turns into rubble. But there's still hopefully it could be a bait and switch, because they just killed off like the most interesting character of the entire show. And then, of course, as soon as Grant is killed, Loki masters the enchantment power and Alioth is defeated, opening the way to the castle and presumably the person behind the TVA. The castle and the surrounding energy around it also look very similar to the castle seen in the Quantum Realm back in Ant-Man and the Wasp, if you remember that. Overall, this episode was far superior than the past 2 episodes, despite still struggling with a number of very boring and quite stupid scenes. The graphics, especially the recreation of Asgard and Alioth, are what you expect from Marvel. The scene with the cruiser was top-notch. The alligator was put to good use as well for comedic effect. Both of the scenes he was featured in, he stole. That's the alligator. While the gator stole the scenes he was in, Grant's Loki definitely stole the entire episode. His acting was exceptional, and the way his Loki was written was also very well done. On the opposite end, they made Sylvie look like an idiot with Renslayer. On top of that, the connection scene between Sylvie and Loki should have just been deleted. It was that bad. So I give this a 5 out of 10. It was as good as the first episode, but again, there's so much left on the floor that they should have been doing with this episode that could have made it a lot better, and they just didn't get there. So this was just an average episode. Let me know what you think. My name is John Trent, and you've been watching Bounding Into Comics.